Hi BookTube, Aaron here. Hope you're doing very well. Today I've got a random reading update for you, and things have piled up a bit. Normally I try to keep the list of books I'm going to talk about in these updates relatively low, but since the beginning of the month I've finished 6 books, and a couple of these books were books that I had already been reading in May, and so I really just finished them off in the first week or so of the month. But I thought I'd just go through them, um, have a bit of a dedicated time to talk about these books, to kind of then save some time in the monthly wrap up. So the first book that I finished this month, I think I finished it on the 1st of June, were the poems of Elizabeth Bishop. I have already talked about a little bit about how my relationship with Elizabeth Bishop has changed. I think I talked about that in my wrap up, and I made a Poetry Thursday video sort of dedicated to Elizabeth Bishop as well, and that's probably the best place to go to if you want to sort of see how my relationship has changed and sort of what I enjoy in her poetry. Then the next thing that I finished was Balthasar by Laurence Durrell. This is the second book in his Alexandria quartet. I picked up Justine, the first book in the Alexandria quartet, in May, and really loved it. And so since then I've picked up the 3 other books, and this was the next one. And I think I have explained a fair bit about the kind of premise of this book. The premise of the first book is a guy who's lived in Alexandria and has now moved away, and he's reflecting on his time there, on the people he knew, on a relationship he had, and then an affair that he had while he was in that relationship, and just this sort of network of lives around him in a period of I don't know, a very sort of delicate period in history, I suppose. It's just before the outbreak of the Second World War, and I think at that period of time, a lot of European forces were very present in Egypt at the time. I'm not entirely sure exactly what the political situation was, but there was certainly a rising tension there as well, I think as well. And that's all sort of reflected in these books, and it comes into clearer focus here as well. It is worth noting that the Alexandria that Durrell is presenting isn't really the real city. It's there for him to just explore things, and yet a certain element of political of politics. You know, a lot of the characters in here have some kind of tie to various governments, and some of them are spies and things like that. So yeah, I don't know. There's that a very sort of sensual book, but also a book full of intrigue as well. But then, so in this book, then you're getting a totally different perspective. He's been told that as he's been looking back, as he's been writing this novel about his life, there were things going on that he just didn't see and and didn't pick up on. And so then in this book, sometimes you are getting the same events from the first book from a totally different perspective. You're getting backstories of characters, or even family members of the characters that you met in the first book, and then suddenly become much more important in this second book. And to me, the whole narrative of what's actually going on feels much clearer in this book. And I think that might just be because you've had more time to get used to Durrell's writing style, and you've had more time to work out who these characters are, since the first book is, it is much more character focused, and so it's a slow layering of these different character profiles, and then suddenly this is kind of exploding that. So it is a lot of fun. There's a wonderful set piece in here. It's a sort of carnival season that they have where everybody's in disguise, and something dreadful happens, and it's just this wonderful long set piece that was just a lot of fun to read. And so again, when I go on and talk about the rest of the Alexandria Quartet, maybe I'll do a better job. Maybe I'll make a whole video just dedicated to the quartet as a whole. But if you're watching this now, if you are interested in reading it, I definitely recommend it. That the writing is lovely and intoxicating. It's also worth knowing, though, there's certainly a lot of kind of Orientalism going on here. He's the Alexandria there is an imagined Alexandria, and it's very sort of overly exotic, I suppose. And also, I think he is still reflecting the opinions that people sort of would have had. So you have all these people from all these different places, all these different cultures, sort of squished up against each other, and so that there are times when you're getting a lot of the derogatory language that would have been very present at that period in time, and also something that the commenter Joe Smith brought up, and I noticed more presently in this book, is every now and then just the way women are presented. Every now and then it makes you feel a little uncomfortable. It's normally through just something that a character says, and yet you do end up questioning, but why was that in there? Why did he choose to say that way? So there may be one or two bits that make you feel a little uncomfortable, but the writing is wonderful. The work as a whole has been wonderful so far, but it's just worth bearing those things in mind. The next thing is The Pillow Book by Shōnagon. This is a book about court life in Japan in, I think, the 11th, sort of the 10th through to 11th century. I won't say too much about this. I was reading this for Classics and Company, and I was a kind of guest co-host. I haven't done a terribly good job as a co-host on the Discord server. I'm pretty, I don't know, I'm not terribly good at Discord and group chat, so I apologise for that. But I'm hoping that eventually we'll be having a discussion about the book, and so I'll talk a bit about it there. But I did enjoy it. It's not a favourite of favourites. It was difficult in its own way, but kind of in a way I was expecting it to be, because it's definitely a book that's throwing you into another culture, which is a lot of fun. There's a lot to learn, and a lot to enjoy. But you then realise that it's not your culture, and so you've got a lot of catching up to do. But yeah, it was definitely a lot of fun. And then 3 more books that I finished. The next one is very short. This is A Time to Keep Silent by Patrick Leigh Fermor, a writer that I really enjoy. And this is a book that he put together. Essentially, it's made up of these 3 different journeys he made to 3 different monasteries. And the book is made up out of the letters that he was writing back, or at least taken from them, and he sort of built these sort of essays, I suppose, or these little travel pieces out of the letters that he wrote, which I thought was really quite nice, and it definitely does feel like that. I think it's definitely a kind of book for somebody who's already read some Patrick Leigh Fermor, and you just want a little extra dose. He does the thing that he does in Time of Gifts quite a lot, where He likes to try and connect things up in his head as much as he can. He's obsessed by languages, obsessed by history. He's not always the most accurate historian, but there's a really fascinating way. Um, I don't know. He just he makes all these random connections about things through what he's read and what he's heard about, and he does that a little bit in here, and it's always fun. But I always take it with a little grain of salt. There are three places that he visits. He visits the Abbey of Saint Vandril, de Fontenelle, which I think I haven't pronounced that very well. I think that's in Normandy, and it's a Benedictine monastery. And then the next place he visits is a little stricter. It's Le Grand Trappe, which is, let's see if he says who they are. Essentially, they're the order, whatever kind of monks are there. They're kind of related, I think, to the Benedictines, but they're much stricter, and particularly when it comes to things like silence. So let's see. They're sort of also related to the Cistercians. So I don't really know how the different monastic orders. I don't know how they all link up and what the kind of family tree is. But I kind of gather from what he said there that they all kind of are related. The ones he mentions in here are kind of related to the Benedictines. But then the other place he goes, and this is one I found really interesting, were the rock monasteries of Cappadocia. This is a little picture of one there, a little sort of sketch of one, and there are sketches of all of them at the beginning. And there are also some really interesting black and white photographs of these rock monasteries in Cappadocia. And these are much, much older. And essentially, some of these monasteries are the kind of places that these European and these French monasteries, that they were trying to emulate the kind of life that was going on there. And it was really interesting in the initial monasteries that he was going to in France, particularly the first one, Saint Vandril. He kind of felt this strange, kind of a shock to arriving in this place that's so different to the rest of the world, and it was quite interesting, him realizing that distance that he had between his own life and the kind of life going on in these monasteries. And then when he's at these rock monasteries in Cappadocia, in present day Turkey, there's another kind of distance as well, because we really don't know too much about exactly when these were made, about exactly what went on in them, and as well it's no longer the religion that's practiced in that country. It's no longer the official religion there, and so suddenly there's this massive, whereas before it was a slight cultural gap between him and the people, and suddenly he's there realizing this huge historical gap between, I suppose, the historical moment that he's in and the story of the place and the sort of artifacts that he's looking at. So that was the bit that sort of stood out the most to me, and I really enjoyed it. Not my favourite thing by Fermor, but it was a lot of fun and quite fascinating. And then the next thing I finished was Dune by Frank Herbert. So I was sort of participating in the Dune in June event. I was going to read Ulysses in June and July, but I think that the Dune in June event just sort of threw Ulysses out of the water, and I sort of realised I'm probably not going to read it this year. I'll get around to it some other time. But this has been sitting around for ages. and I've been meaning to read it for a long time, and I just really enjoyed it. I don't really know what to say about it, since there's been so much said about it so far in the Dune in June discussions that Sean D. Standfast has been doing with Aaron Hook and Debs from Rainer Reed stuff. And so I've been really enjoying those discussions that they've been having. And also Steve Donahue has been making videos about Dune as well, which is what I found quite helpful. But it's just a wonderful, immersive science fiction book. I think the most curious thing about it is it is the world. You're trying to work out exactly how this works, how people can even survive there, um, and there's a lot of politicking, a lot of intrigue, a lot of stuff going on in the background, which again, I don't know, it's almost like reading John le Carré or something, and you're sort of trying to infer what's going on. You're not always being shown explicitly what's going on in the book. That was really interesting. In some ways, it's almost like a Shakespearean play, because a lot of there are some action scenes, but a lot of the main action you're not really shown that much, and instead you get a lot of the conversations in the aftermath of of that violence. So it kind of reminded me of a Shakespeare play in a way. I think the only criticism I have of Dune is really the main character Paul. By the end of the book, he almost seems too powerful. Um, I don't want to use the word perfect, but it just seems like, I don't know. There's a kind of effortlessness, and I suppose as he's becoming more and more powerful as the book um, sort of goes on, part of the thing that does make it so compelling is the fact that he's getting more compelling, but there's a more powerful, but there's something kind of disturbing about that at the same time. And I don't know, that my feelings towards him are kind of unresolved. I just felt like by the end he just overcame things a little too easily. But I think that will be kind of undermined in the next book. I think I don't know when I'll go on to read the rest of the Dune books, but it's certainly something I'd want to do now, considering how much I enjoyed the first book. And then finally, something I just finished earlier today. It's Under Western Eyes by Joseph Conrad, a writer that I really enjoy. I love the way he writes, and I just love the way he just sort of delves in to certain subjects. He's a bit depressing. He's a bit of a pessimist, and he's quite skeptical. And yeah, I don't know, but he often just dives in to the darker side of society and of history, and I kind of respect that about him. It's not something you want to look for in every author, but I like the way he does it. This is a book about, I suppose it's Conrad exploring his relationship to Russia in a way. Conrad was born in Poland in the 19th century, so at that time it had been annexed. I think most of it had been annexed by Russia, and certainly his technical citizenship when he was young was Russian citizenship, and he eventually sort of gave that up when he took up British citizenship. I think it was also annexed by Austria and Prussia, I think is what I read in the introduction. And so he's got a very mixed relationship with Russia. He's not he's not really a big fan. His father was a Polish nationalist, and so they had to leave the country. And as he was writing this book, once he'd finished it, he had a nervous breakdown. And so it was a book that was very close to his heart, and he was exploring things that felt very real to him. And it's a book mainly about Russian revolutionaries in sort of the very early years of the 20th century. And I think he's used two historical events and he sort of conflated them together. And in the opening pages of the book, two young, you presume two young students have, one of them throws a bomb under the sledge of a politician. Somehow the politician survives, and as the crowd sort of gathers round to see what's going on, another bomb is thrown and lands at the feet of the politician, and that's the end for him. And the bombs are thrown by two different people, and one of those people who throws the bomb turns up at the in the lodgings of our main character. The main character is not a revolutionary. He doesn't really have any family, and his only aspiration is to keep studying, to study well, to get good results, to win prizes, and to earn respect, and sort of make his way in life that way to be respected, and maybe to eventually to find himself in a decent government position. And he kind of idolizes certain people of authority, so he's quite conservative in that way. And yet the fact that he seems quite good natured to people around him, the fact that he has no family ties or anything like that, kind of makes him the perfect person for this revolutionary, for this terrorist, to go and hide with. So he turns up at his house, and makes him his accomplice and says, you have to go to this person. He's got horses, so I can make my escape. And the whole book is about how he reacts to that, the consequences of him reacting to that. And the book eventually ends up in Geneva, where it's a very sort of cosmopolitan city, and there's a big Russian community there. And there's a sort of cell of this revolutionary group are all there, and that's where one of the places where they all meet together and they sort of plan what they want to do. So there's all this intrigue going on, and some of the people there are the family of this guy, of this terrorist who turned up in the lodgings of this student, and it's one of those books where, at least part of the fun of it for me, and it's kind of fun and it's also infuriating, is you're just trying to work out what the characters' motivations are, exactly where they stand. There's a lot of people saying one thing and kind of meaning another, of people inferring things. It's kind of similar to Dune in some way, and I suppose people holding things back. You have a lot of double agents and moles and things like that in there, and it's just a really really fascinating book. So I really enjoyed it. Probably not my favourite thing by Conrad, but I think I prefer this to Heart of Darkness. But I think my favourite book by him is still The Secret Agent, which again is, he's exploring some similar themes. That book is again all about anarchists and revolutionaries and double agents and things like that. But that's everything that I've finished so far. At the moment, I'm working my way through the complete poems of Emily Dickinson. Very much enjoying that, and I'm reading From the Holy Mountain by William Dalrymple, which is very similar to what's going on in A Time to Keep Silence by Patrick Leigh Fermor, and he does mention Patrick Leigh Fermor, I believe, in here as well. And it's about he's tracing the journey of a Byzantine monk, so from Mount Athos in Greece over to Istanbul, through then through Turkey into Syria and Lebanon, and he makes his way down all the way back round to Egypt, and he's exploring the what's left of the Christian world of the Byzantine period, and it's really really fascinating. it's quite sad and traumatic in some other ways, because it's a very fraught and I don't know, it's an area of the world where there's a lot, there's a lot simmering there. This was written in the mid 1990s, I think, and a lot has changed since then. As he was writing here, there was a lot of kind of quite ugly stuff going on in Turkey, particularly between the Turks and the Kurds. I'm not entirely sure exactly how that's panned out to the present day. And also in that period, they were noticing a rise in Islamic fundamentalism as well, which again we're still kind of seeing in that part of the world. But the thing I found fascinating is that then over in Syria, that's kind of the safe country for the period where there's it's kind of a dictatorship, but it's kind of the kind of area where as long as you don't say anything against the government, there's a lot of relative freedom there. So it was kind of weird, because now it seems like the opposite is true, that suddenly there's been that it's sort of war torn and just awful in Syria at the moment. So it was fascinating to see what it was like back then, 20, 30 years ago. And I think I'm still in. Am I still in Syria? Can't remember exactly where I am. Yeah, I think he's still in Syria as I'm writing, and eventually he'll make his way over to Lebanon. But yeah, more about that once I've finished it. And I think for the time being, I'm going to stick with those two books and not add another book, and I'll just have one book of prose, one book of poetry, and then I've just selected two books I think I'll get to should I finish either of those this month. One is The Leopard by Giuseppe de Lampedusa, and this is With the Holy Mountain and A Time to Keep Silence. They're all books that I put on a list of books that I wanted to read this summer, and I made a video about that. So I might try and get to that at some point. And then this is a book I picked up and I didn't end up including in a book haul. It slipped through the net, but it's the Voronezh notebooks by Osip Mandelstam. And this is, to say who's translated it, it's translated by Andrew Davis, and it's just a great little poetry collection from the New York Review of Books. I like their little poetry books. I've got a few of them now. The interesting thing here is that the author photograph is his mugshot, because he was eventually, I think, arrested and I think then executed by the Soviets. And that's everything. So that's what I've been reading recently, what's currently on the go, and potentially, if I finish one or two of the books I'm currently reading, what I'll be getting to soon. But for now, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.